There was a woman named Virginia Satir, who was a psychologist, who had the very same kind of approach. There are many, many people that have seen this. Sam Keen, the philosopher, wrote a book called Hymns to an Unknown God, where this triadic response is something that many people have seen. And it's a response to change and uncertainty. I'll use Virginia Satir's to start with before we go on to Paul Ray. And she said basically when change happens, you can imagine like a clock where the hand is at midnight and it's going clockwise down through 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock and then back up to 9 o'clock and up to midnight. Now, as it goes down, the pace of the change, if it's a pendulum, begins to accelerate. And as it gets down to 6, it's sort of hesitating, it's swinging back and forth, and it needs a certain kind of impetus to swing back up all the way to 12 o'clock. Now, the 3 responses to this are to be afraid of the change, in which case you clench, you go into contraction, and you try to kind of keep things there at 3 o'clock. You try to be regressive and hold on very hard so you don't create the uncertainty that's going to come when you move into this other quadrant, okay? Most people respond just by sort of hanging on down there at 6 on the clock and just hoping for the best, that if they can just swing back and forth in a smaller arc, it feels more safe and secure and they're sort of in control. The third response is to really lean into the momentum of change and actually bring it through 6 and around to 12. And that's what a healthy individual does in response to change, according to the therapeutic model, let's say, that Virginia Satir put forward. The sociological model that Paul Ray puts forward in his book, The Cultural Creatives, is that as this change is happening, people go into fear. And when they go into fear, one response is this contraction, this regression to an imagined prior secure state where there were clear lines of authority and clear ideas of what was right and what was wrong and what reality was, and your pastor could tell you that, or some other trusted authority. Sociologically, this is called fundamentalism. Whether it's fundamentalist politics or fundamentalist religion, it's turning one's back on the subtleties and the potentialities of all the diversities that are manifesting now in evolution. And it's wanting to divide the world into black and white and to be on the side of the white and against the side of the black. And he estimates, Paul Ray, that maybe 30% of our society in the United States is of that bent. Probably more, interestingly enough, percentage-wise, than most other societies in the world, according to his research. So it's a kind of return to authority, and it's wanting things to be you're either for us or you're against us, okay? The second response is the kind of hanging on by the fingernails response, which is, again, sociologically, Paul Ray estimates about 53% of the population. They're afraid of change, they're nervous about it, but they're hoping that if they just kind of hang in there, it won't be too severe, they won't lose their job, they'll actually maybe profit a little bit by it, and they'll be able to just sort of hang on and get by. But they don't, seek out a megachurch or, fundamentalist political ideology as a framework to make them feel secure. They're basically this sort of secular middle, we might say. And then finally, the other change is what he calls, or the other approach, the other response. It's what he calls the cultural creatives that actually open their eyes and lean into the change and welcome the diversity, welcome the internet, welcome the international communication, welcome international air travel, welcome doing cross-cultural communication, welcome doing adventure travel in other cultures, and on it goes. Welcome new cuisine, experiment with diet, all the sorts of things that the world is now making available to us that weren't available a scant 20 or 25 years ago. So they can create a new culture. That's why he calls them the cultural creatives. My own view, and what was shown to me in this particular vision 15 years ago, is that what needs to emerge from the evolutionary point of view is a true planetary consciousness. Not a tribal consciousness, not an ethnic consciousness, not a nationalistic consciousness, not a Western versus Eastern consciousness, not a rich versus poor consciousness, but a true planetary consciousness that resonates with the deep, ancient wisdom cultures and indigenous traditions, but goes beyond them in the sense that it is planetary in scope and not bound to a particular geographical region. So sometimes I call this new consciousness a both-and consciousness, because it can see the whole instantaneously and all of the proliferating diversity within it. That's how we get beyond polarity. It's the only way to get beyond polarity, because to try to hold evolution back is a hopeless cause. We have already, in science, the notion that the cosmic constant is that the universe is expanding infinitely. It's not one big bang that somehow runs out of steam and then collapses back on itself. It's expanding infinitely. And if that's true, which intuitively feels completely right to me, then our consciousness has to follow in the same way. We have to be able to think and experience things paradoxically, not in the either-or realm, which in its extreme form is called fundamentalism. In its modern secular form, it's still either-or consciousness. It's called sometimes postmodernism, which is like an intensification of this sort of modern individualistic mind compared to, let's say, the ancient indigenous mind, which was more collectively oriented, which understood that the whole cosmos is alive with consciousness. Plants, animals, sacred sites, place, rocks, all are imbued with a kind of consciousness.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Almost out of tape here.
I ran out of tape, okay.